Hold my hand and walk again." The 98-year-old man only believed when he saw the miracle. Walter Johnson had been pushing everyone away ever since his only daughter passed 3 years ago, refusing to leave his wheelchair, even though he was physically capable of walking with support. His stubbornness was well known to the entire staff at Maple Grove Retirement Home, a nursing home in rural Michigan where he had lived for 5 years. It was on a Tuesday afternoon that a brown-haired boy with curious eyes appeared at the reception desk, asking if he could visit the oldest grandpa in the place. Ethan was just 8 years old, but he spoke with a maturity that caught attention. The receptionist, Mrs. Parker, explained that he wasn't related to any resident, but the boy insisted so much that she ended up taking him to Walter. "Hi, Grandpa. I came to visit you," Ethan said, approaching the wheelchair where the old man sat motionless in the garden. "Get out of here, kid. I'm not your grandpa and I don't want any visitors," Walter grumbled, turning his face away. Ethan wasn't intimidated. He sat on the grass beside the wheelchair and started talking about his school, his drawings, and how he loved watching the little birds. Walter pretended not to listen, but his eyes occasionally flickered toward the boy. "My grandpa used to love listening to me talk," Ethan said softly. "He said I had a voice that chased away loneliness." Those words stirred something in Walter's chest, but he held firm in his refusal. When Nurse Jennifer came to take Ethan away, the boy said goodbye, promising to return the next day. "Don't come back," Walter shouted, but his voice came out weaker than he intended. The next morning, Ethan appeared again, this time holding a sheet of paper. It was a colorful drawing of an old man and a boy walking hand in hand through a park full of flowers. "I drew us," the boy said, handing the paper to Walter. "I don't walk, kid. I'm in a wheelchair, in case you haven't noticed," Walter snapped. "But you can walk, right? Mrs. Parker told me your legs work," Ethan insisted. The comment hit Walter like a rock. 3 years ago, he had made the decision never to stand again, never to walk. It was the day his daughter Emily had passed away, taken by an illness he couldn't accept. Since then, the wheelchair had become his self-imposed prison, his way of punishing himself for all the years he had been an absent and strict father. Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, take a moment to like the video and especially to subscribe to the channel. It helps us a lot as we're just getting started. Now back to the story. Head nurse Barbara watched Ethan and Walter's daily meetings with growing concern. The boy always arrived in the late afternoon after school and spent an hour talking to the old man, who stubbornly refused to respond. "Ethan, you shouldn't get so attached to Mr. Johnson," Barbara said one afternoon. "He's a very closed-off person and he might end up hurting you." "My grandpa was like that at first too," the boy replied. "My mom said he was really sad when my grandma left, but then he started smiling again when I was born." The revelation about Ethan's grandfather explained a lot to Barbara. The boy had lost his paternal grandfather 6 months earlier, and his mother, Jessica, worked as a cleaner in a building near the nursing home. That was why Ethan spent his afternoons there, waiting for his mother's shift to end. Walter began to look forward to Ethan's visits, though he would never admit it. The boy brought a different energy to his monotonous days, a restlessness he hadn't felt in a long time. But whenever he caught himself waiting for the boy's arrival, he doubled down on his hostility. "Why don't you go home and leave an old man in peace?" Walter asked one afternoon when Ethan had arrived earlier than usual. "Because you look sad," the boy simply replied. "My grandpa taught me that sad people need company, even when they say they don't." Ethan's sincerity disarmed any adult, and Walter was no exception. The elderly man felt his armor of coldness crack a little, but he quickly built another barrier. During one of their conversations, Ethan mentioned he liked music, and Walter let slip that he had been a music teacher in his youth. The boy got so excited that the next day he brought a harmonica his grandpa had given him. "Can you teach me how to play it right?" asked Ethan, blowing into the harmonica off-key. "I don't remember anything about music anymore," Walter lied, but his fingers moved involuntarily as if they still remembered piano keys. Ethan began playing the harmonica every day, always off-key, always persistent. Other residents started gathering in the garden to listen, some smiling, others covering their ears in playful teasing. The atmosphere at Maple Grove was changing, becoming livelier, happier. It was the director, Mrs. Thompson, who decided to intervene. She called Jessica, Ethan's mother, for a formal conversation. "Mrs. Jessica, your son is disrupting our routine," Mrs. Thompson said firmly. "Our residents need peace and quiet, and this commotion isn't appropriate." Jessica felt humiliated. She was already struggling to keep her job and raise her son alone, and now even the one safe distraction she'd found for Ethan was being questioned. "I'm sorry, Mrs. Thompson. I'll talk to Ethan and make sure he stops bothering everyone," Jessica said, tears in her eyes. But when Jessica told Ethan about the conversation, the boy refused to accept it. The next day, he showed up in the director's office, accompanied by 3 residents: Mrs. Hope, 89 years old, Mr. Anthony, 84, and Mrs. Rose, 91. "We want the boy to keep coming," Mrs. Hope said, tapping her foot. "He's brought life to this place. Haven't you noticed how different Walter is? He still doesn't talk much to the boy, but he doesn't chase anyone out of the garden anymore," added Mr. Anthony. "And his harmonica is getting better," laughed Mrs. Rose. "Yesterday we even recognized a tune." Mrs. Thompson found herself in a delicate situation. The residents themselves were defending Ethan's visits, something that had never happened before. Reluctantly, she agreed to let the boy keep coming, but with stricter hours. Weeks passed, and the relationship between Ethan and Walter evolved almost imperceptibly. The old man still didn't say much, but he stopped sending the boy away. Sometimes, when Ethan played the harmonica, Walter would nod slightly to the rhythm. Then on a rainy April afternoon, everything changed. Ethan arrived soaked and shivering from the cold. Walter watched him silently for a few minutes before speaking gently for the first time. "You should have stayed home in this weather," Walter said, his voice softer than ever. "I promised I'd come every day," Ethan replied, wiping his face with his sleeve. "Why?" Walter asked, genuinely curious. Ethan thought for a moment before answering. "Because my grandpa told me promises are sacred, and because you need to know someone cares about you." Those words struck Walter like lightning. He turned his face away to hide the emotion in his eyes. It had been so long since anyone cared about him that he'd forgotten what it felt like. "My grandpa was really sad when he lost someone too," Ethan continued, "but he told me he had to choose, stop living or keep living in honor of that person. He chose to keep going." Walter closed his eyes. Ethan was talking about exactly what he had faced when Emily left. The difference was that he had chosen to stop living, using the wheelchair as a symbol of his surrender. "What if the person left because they were tired of seeing us sad?" Walter asked quietly. "My grandpa used to say that those who leave want to see us happy again," Ethan replied. "They want to see us walking, running, living." That night, Walter couldn't sleep. Ethan's words echoed in his mind. Emily had always asked him to take care of himself, to live each day to the fullest. But when she left, he had done the exact opposite. The next day, Ethan didn't show up. Walter grew restless, asking the nurses if anyone had seen the boy. Jessica called to explain that Ethan had a fever and couldn't visit the retirement home. "Is he okay?" Walter asked, surprising Nurse Jennifer with his concern. "It's just a cold, Mr. Walter. He should be better in a few days," Jennifer reassured him. But the days passed, and Ethan didn't improve. A whole week went by without his visit, and Walter became a different person. He constantly asked about the boy, stared toward the entrance of the home, and refused to leave the garden. Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, take a moment to like and especially subscribe to the channel. It helps us a lot as we're just starting out. Now continuing. When Ethan finally returned, Walter felt a relief he hadn't experienced in years. But the boy was different, thinner, paler, with a fragility that hadn't been there before. "Hi, Grandpa," Ethan said with a weak smile. "I missed you." "I missed you too," Walter admitted for the first time. It was then that Ethan revealed something that would change everything. "The doctors said my heart is weaker than normal. That's why I get sick sometimes. They told me I need to avoid really strong emotions." Walter's world crumbled. That brave boy, who had brought light to his days, was facing serious health problems. And he, Walter, was sitting in a wheelchair by choice, wasting the ability to walk that Ethan might never fully have. "Ethan," Walter said, his voice trembling, "if I could get up from this chair, would you be happy?" The boy's eyes lit up. "So happy, Grandpa. So happy." That night, something extraordinary happened. Alone in his room, Walter placed his hands on the arms of the chair and tried to stand. His legs shook, his muscles protested after 3 years of voluntary neglect, but he managed to stay on his feet for a few seconds before collapsing back into the chair. The pain was intense, but he had felt something stronger: hope. From that day on, Walter began doing secret exercises. Every night after everyone was asleep, he practiced standing up, moving his legs, trying to take a few steps while leaning against the wall. It was painful, frustrating, and often he nearly gave up. But whenever he thought of quitting, he remembered Ethan's smile and the joy he would see in the boy's eyes if he could walk again. The retirement home's physical therapist, Amanda, began noticing subtle changes in Walter. His muscles seemed less atrophied, his posture slightly different. She offered help a few times, but Walter always refused, claiming he didn't want physical therapy. During this time, Walter and Ethan developed a true friendship. The older man began sharing stories of his youth, when he was a music teacher, how he met his wife, the day Emily was born. Ethan listened to every word carefully, asking questions that showed wisdom beyond his years. "Grandpa, were you happy when you played the piano?" Ethan asked one afternoon. "Very happy," replied Walter. "Music was my life." "And why did you stop?" Walter hesitated before answering. "Because when Emily left, I thought I didn't deserve to be happy anymore." "But don't you think she would have wanted you to keep being happy?" asked Ethan, with his simple yet profound logic. These conversations were changing Walter from the inside. He began questioning all the decisions he'd made over the past 3 years, all the ways he'd chosen to punish himself for losing his daughter. Then, something unexpected happened. Jessica showed up at the retirement home one afternoon, visibly upset and worried. She had learned about Ethan's heart condition through the school, which had noticed his excessive fatigue and requested medical tests. "You're giving my son false hope," Jessica said, confronting Walter in the garden. "He comes home talking about having a new grandfather, about you two being friends. I don't want him to get attached and then suffer when something happens." The accusation cut deep. Walter understood Jessica's fear, but he also realized she didn't grasp how much Ethan was helping him heal. "I won't hurt your son," Walter said firmly. "He's teaching me how to live again." "People your age don't have much time left, sir," Jessica said harshly. "I can't let my son go through another loss." The argument ended with Jessica forbidding Ethan from returning to the retirement home. The boy cried, begged, but the decision was final. Before leaving, he managed to hide a note under the cushion of Walter's chair. When Walter found it that night, his hands trembled as he read, "Grandpa, don't give up on walking. I believe in you. Even from far away, I'll keep cheering for you. Love, Ethan." For the first time since Emily's passing, Walter wept. He cried for the pain, the longing, the lost time, but also for the hope Ethan had planted in his heart. The days without Ethan were the longest Walter had ever spent at the home. He sat in the garden, staring at the entrance, waiting for a visit that wouldn't come. Other residents tried to comfort him, but he had retreated into his shell again. It was Mrs. Hope who came up with an idea. She offered to visit Jessica and try to persuade her to let Ethan return. When she arrived at the modest house where Jessica lived with her son, she found Ethan even more withdrawn and despondent. "The boy hasn't been eating well since he stopped coming to the home," Mrs. Hope told Jessica, "and Walter is worse off. They're good for each other." "I'm scared," Jessica admitted. "My son already lost his grandfather. I can't bear the thought of him going through that again." "Dear," Mrs. Hope said with the wisdom of her 89 years, "life is made of people coming and going, but the love that stays between them is never lost. You're keeping your son from living because you're afraid he'll suffer later." Those words made Jessica reflect deeply. Over the next few days, she watched Ethan and saw how he was closing himself off, losing his usual joy. Maybe Mrs. Hope was right. Meanwhile, at the home, Walter intensified his secret exercises. The pain was immense, but he was determined. If he couldn't see Ethan anymore, at least he could honor the unspoken promise he'd made to the boy, to try walking again. One night during one of his exercises, Walter lost his balance and fell to the floor. The fall was bad, and he lay there for minutes, considering giving up. But then his eyes landed on Ethan's drawing on the wall, showing the two of them walking together. "I won't give up," Walter told himself, struggling to his feet. The night nurse, Rachel, found Walter trying to pull himself back into his chair. She didn't ask any questions, just helped him. But the next day she spoke to the physical therapist, Amanda, about what had happened. "Mr. Johnson, you need professional help if you really want to try walking," Amanda said the following day. "I can help you, but it has to be supervised." For the first time in 3 years, Walter accepted help. "I want to walk again," he said simply. The news that Walter had officially started physical therapy spread quickly through the retirement home. Everyone was surprised and excited. Mrs. Hope told Jessica, who finally understood the impact her son had made on the elderly man's life. "Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, take a moment to leave a like, and especially to subscribe to the channel. It helps us a lot as we're just starting out. Now back to the story." Jessica made a difficult but necessary decision. She would allow Ethan to visit Walter one last time, so they could say goodbye properly, and so the boy could see that his words had made a difference. "Ethan," she said one afternoon, "you can visit Mr. Johnson tomorrow, but it'll be the last time, okay?" The boy was radiant with happiness. He barely slept that night, eager to see his grandpa of the heart again. Meanwhile, Walter worked intensely with Amanda. In the 2 weeks since he'd started official physical therapy, his progress had been remarkable. Amanda explained that muscles have memory, and since Walter had walked normally for years, his recovery was faster than expected. "Your legs are functional, Mr. Johnson," Amanda said. "The problem was always psychological, not physical. You simply chose to stop walking. And now I've chosen to walk again," Walter replied with determination. The day of the reunion arrived. Ethan entered the retirement home with his mother, who stayed in the lobby while the boy went to the garden to meet Walter. The elderly man was in his wheelchair, as always, and Ethan ran to hug him. "Grandpa, how are you?" Ethan asked, his words tumbling out with joy. "I'm well, my boy," Walter said, his voice choked. "I missed you so much." They talked for a few minutes, Ethan telling him about school and how he'd thought of Walter every day. The old man listened to every word, etching the special moment into his memory. Other residents began to gather, forming a semicircle around them. Mrs. Hope, Mr. Anthony, Mrs. Rose, they all wanted to witness the reunion. Even some nurses paused their work to watch. "Ethan," Walter said, his voice trembling slightly, "do you remember that promise you made me about teaching me to walk again?" "I remember, Grandpa," Ethan replied, his eyes shining. "I have a surprise for you," Walter said, placing his hands on the arms of the wheelchair. Silence fell over the garden. Everyone watched without speaking, barely breathing. Ethan leaned forward, instinctively sensing something important was about to happen. "Hold my hand," Walter whispered. Ethan stretched out his small hand, and Walter gripped it firmly. Then, slowly, his muscles trembling with effort and emotion, Walter began to rise from the wheelchair. The first movement was hesitant, unsteady. His knees shook, his legs protested. But Ethan held his hand tightly, offering not just physical but emotional support. "You can do it, Grandpa," Ethan whispered. "I believe in you." Walter stood up completely. For a few seconds, he remained on his feet beside the wheelchair, supported only by the boy's hand. Tears streamed down his face, but they were tears of joy, of victory, of rebirth. "Now let's walk," Walter said in a steady voice. The first step was shaky, the second more sure. Translation. On the third step, Ethan began to cry with happiness, still holding the elderly man's hand tightly. They walked together for about 5 meters under the applause and tears of everyone present. Mrs. Hope wept openly. Mr. Anthony kept wiping his glasses, and the nurses wore huge smiles on their faces. Jessica, who had heard the applause and come to see what was happening, stood frozen at the garden entrance. There was her son, hand in hand with a 98-year-old man who had literally stood up to honor a promise made to a child. Walter stopped after 5 meters, exhausted but radiant. He turned to Ethan and, for the first time since they'd met, truly hugged him. "Thank you, my boy," Walter whispered in Ethan's ear. "You brought me back to life." "Thank you for not giving up, Grandpa," Ethan replied, tightening the embrace. Jessica approached slowly, still processing what she had witnessed. She saw the transformation in both of them. Ethan was brighter than he had been in months, and Walter seemed like a completely different person. "I was wrong," Jessica said, her voice choked. "You two heal each other." Walter looked at Jessica with gratitude. "Your son taught me it's never too late to start over, and I hope I can teach him that it's worth fighting for our dreams." From that day on, the routine at Maple Grove Retirement Home changed completely. Ethan resumed visiting Walter daily, and together they walked through the garden every afternoon. Walter gradually regained his strength and mobility, but more than that, he regained his will to live. The elderly man returned to playing the piano, teaching Ethan not just music but also perseverance, the importance of relationships, and how to find beauty even in the hardest moments. Jessica, seeing the positive change in her son, let the friendship flourish. She realized Ethan was more confident, happier, and coping better with his heart condition because he had found in Walter an example of resilience. Over the following months, Walter became an inspiration to everyone at the retirement home. Other residents began participating more in activities, motivated by the example that it's never too late for positive change. Ethan, in turn, found in Walter not just a replacement for the grandfather he had lost, but also a mentor, a friend, and proof that age doesn't define a person's limitations. The harmonica that once sounded off-key now played recognizable melodies, accompanied by Walter's piano. They performed for other residents, creating moments of joy and unity that transformed the atmosphere of the place. The change was so significant that Mrs. Thompson, the retirement home's director, adjusted the facility's policies, encouraging more interaction between residents and visitors of all ages. The friendship between Walter and Ethan became legendary at the home and in the local community. People came from afar to meet the 98-year-old man who had walked again out of love for a child, and the 8-year-old boy who had restored hope to someone who thought it was lost forever. In their daily conversations, Walter often spoke about Emily, his daughter. Ethan listened carefully, understanding that talking about those we love is a way of keeping them with us. The elderly man realized he had honored Emily's memory far more beautifully by choosing to live than by choosing to punish himself. "You know, Ethan," Walter said one sunny September afternoon, "I always thought losing someone meant our life ended too. But you taught me that losing someone can be the start of a new way to love." "How so, Grandpa?" Ethan asked, ever curious. "When my daughter passed, I stopped living because I thought it showed how much I loved her," Walter explained. "But now I understand that the best way to honor those we love is by continuing to spread love wherever we go." This philosophy became the foundation of their friendship. Walter found in Ethan a new purpose, a new person to love and protect. Ethan found in Walter the security and wisdom that only years can bring. Ethan's heart condition stabilized in the following months. The doctors explained that reducing stress and increasing happiness had significantly contributed to his improvement. The love and stability he found in Walter were, in fact, powerful medicine. During the winter, when Ethan couldn't visit for a few days due to a cold, Walter kept up his routine of walking through the garden. He had learned that discipline was important, not just for his muscles, but for his mind. When Ethan returned, he found Walter stronger than ever. The elderly man had spent the days alone, reflecting on his journey and planning new goals. "Grandpa, you seem different," Ethan observed. "I'm learning to be independent without being lonely," Walter replied. "You taught me that we can lean on each other without losing ourselves." That lesson was important for both of them. Ethan learned he could be strong and still accept help when needed. Walter learned he could love someone new without betraying the memory of those he had loved before. Spring brought new developments for the pair. Walter had regained so much mobility that he could walk longer distances, and Ethan had grown and matured remarkably. They began taking small outings around the retirement home, always with permission and supervision. During one of these walks, they found an old abandoned piano in a community event room. Walter was fascinated by the instrument, and Ethan suggested they ask if they could restore it together. The piano restoration project became a new adventure for them. Walter taught Ethan about basic mechanics, caring for musical instruments, patience, and dedication. Ethan brought youthful energy and enthusiasm to the project. Working together on the piano strengthened their bond even more. Walter discovered he still had so much knowledge to share, and Ethan found that learning could be fun with a patient and kind teacher. The restored piano was placed in the main hall of the retirement home, where Walter began giving small informal concerts. Ethan accompanied him on the harmonica, creating a musical duo that delighted residents and visitors alike. These musical moments became anticipated events for the entire retirement home community, bringing joy, nostalgia, and hope to people who often felt forgotten by the world. The story of Walter and Ethan began to spread through town. Local newspapers wrote about their unlikely friendship, radio programs shared their story of resilience, and other institutions began implementing similar intergenerational programs. But for Walter and Ethan, fame wasn't important. What mattered were the simple moments, their daily walks, conversations about life, shared laughter, and the music they created together. During the December school break, Ethan spent even more time at the retirement home. He helped with activities, chatted with other residents, and became something of a mascot for the place. His presence brought new life to many who felt isolated. Walter watched with pride as Ethan interacted with everyone. The boy had developed impressive emotional maturity, able to connect with people of all ages and backgrounds. "You have a special gift, Ethan," Walter said one afternoon. "You see the person behind the age, the illness, the sadness." "I learned it from you, Grandpa," Ethan replied. "You taught me that everyone has an interesting story if we know how to listen." That constant exchange of learning was what made their friendship so special. It wasn't just an elderly man helping a child or vice versa, but two people who complemented each other and grew together. The Christmas that year was special at Maple Grove Retirement Home. Walter Johnson and Ethan organized a Christmas concert where they played traditional songs for all the residents and visiting family members. The performance was an absolute success, moving everyone in attendance. Jessica watched the concert with tears in her eyes. She had initially feared that the friendship between her son and Walter would be temporary and painful, but now she saw it had become one of the most important things in both their lives. After the concert, Walter pulled Jessica aside for a private conversation. "Jessica, I want you to know your son saved my life," he said sincerely. "And I don't mean that figuratively. He literally brought me back to life." "And you gave him what I couldn't," Jessica replied. "Stability, wisdom, and the love of a grandfather." They talked for an hour, sharing their worries and joys about Ethan. Jessica realized Walter wasn't just a friend to her son. He had become part of their family in a unique and special way. With the arrival of the new year, Walter set new goals for himself. He wanted not just to maintain his mobility, but to improve it further. He wanted to learn new songs to play with Ethan. He wanted to contribute more actively to life at the retirement home. Inspired by Walter's goals, Ethan also set his own. He wanted to get better at the harmonica, help other residents, and focus on his studies to prove that physical limitations don't hinder intellectual achievements. Their partnership grew stronger with these shared goals. They motivated each other, celebrated each other's victories, and supported one another through tough times. In February, when Ethan turned 9, Walter threw him a surprise party at the retirement home. All the residents joined in, and even Mrs. Thompson contributed a special cake. It was a heartwarming celebration that showed how the community had embraced their friendship. "This was the best birthday of my life," Ethan said, hugging Walter. "And you made the best days of my life possible," Walter replied. The birthday party marked a year since they had met. Looking back, both were amazed at how much they had changed and grown together. Walter had gone from a bitter, isolated man to someone active, engaged, and full of purpose. Ethan had evolved from a child searching for connection to a confident, empathetic young boy. But perhaps the most meaningful change was in their perspective on relationships and life itself. They learned that age is just a number when it comes to true friendship, that family can be found in unexpected places, and that it's never too late or too early to make a difference in someone's life. The story of Walter and Ethan continued to inspire people far beyond the walls of Maple Grove Retirement Home. It became an example of how genuine human connections can overcome any barrier and create extraordinary transformations. For Walter, every day walking beside Ethan was a victory over the bitterness that had consumed 3 years of his life. For Ethan, every conversation with Walter was a lesson in perseverance, love, and the beauty of never giving up on your dreams. And so, the 98-year-old man who had chosen to stop walking out of grief and the 8-year-old boy searching for a grandfather found in each other far more than they expected. They found the strength to overcome their limitations and the joy of sharing life with someone who truly cares. Their steps through the retirement home garden weren't just physical walks, but journeys of healing, growth, and unconditional love. And with every step taken hand in hand, they proved that the truest miracles happen when we allow others to touch our hearts. The end of the story. Dear listeners, what did you think of this touching story? Share in the comments if you've ever experienced something similar or know of other heartwarming stories of friendship across generations. Do you believe Walter made the right decision by choosing to walk again? Don't forget to like and subscribe to the channel for more moving stories.